What is up, everyone? Welcome to Tech Savvy Buyer. So today I got my chance to finally cover and test thoroughly the new Be Quiet Pure Loop all-in-one coolers. Now, the two specific models that I worked on and got a chance to test are the 360 mil ones and the 280 mil. Now, both of these retail for a very significantly cheap price, and there's a lot of reasons for how Be Quiet was able to get to that price point. But if you're interested, the 280 mil sells for $104.90, so it's right shy or 10 cents shy of about 105 bucks, and the 360 mil sells for $119.90. So again, 10 cents off from each one before they hit up that next dollar value mark. But is it worth that amount of money? And how does this cooler overall perform? So today we're going to take a quick look at exactly how this guy performs. We're going to put it through some stress tests using Prime 95, as well as running it through Cinebench R20, just to kind of see how this thing will be performing. Now, quick disclaimer, I've only tested this on a Ryzen 5 3400G, so you may have different performance values depending on the CPU you choose, but for the gist of it, the more cores you have, the hotter your temperatures are going to run naturally. This one being a 4-core 8-thread CPU may not get the extreme hottest, but it still would give us a real live situation as to what you can expect depending on how your situation is. Now, for my testing, I put this on a Primo Chill wet bench, so this is an open air environment, which pretty much means that everything is going to be stressed specifically on the AIO. So we're not looking at case thermals that may impact different performance, but we wanted to get a baseline on how this thing performs on its own. Now, if you guys use a case that's pretty restrictive in terms of airflow, your mileage may vary at that point. And if you have an open air bench, definitely you're going to see similar results to what I got testing it. So before we go ahead and jump into the review, I do want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, which is GVGMall.com. Make sure you guys go ahead and click the link up here if you guys want to check out a way to save a lot of money on purchasing a new copy of Windows 10 or Windows Office. You can use my code TSB right down here to save about 18% during checkout, and you can essentially pick up a copy of Windows 10 for less than $20. So it's a pretty good deal, and if you guys are interested, go ahead and check it out. So before we go ahead and get into the benchmarks, I do want to point out what Be Quiet actually decided to do here that makes it a little bit unique from typical AIOs that you guys see. For one, the block is a lot smaller than you'll see in typical other AIOs. And the reason is that they decided to use an inline pump versus a pump that's placed into the actual CPU block. Now, this presents a couple of interesting, I'd say, challenges as well as benefits that you get from using the setup. So one, like I mentioned, the block actually remains a lot slimmer than a typical block. It's not as heavy, it's not as noisy as well, and it also has a overall nice finish. Not to say that that's related to the pump, but it generally is something there. So for all of you minimalist folks out there that don't want to have a ton of RGB, and you already know this, if you're looking at Be Quiet, you're not going to be getting something that's RGB heavy. They just decided to go with a very elegant white LED around, and I think this is particularly nice, especially if you pair this with an RTX 3080 or 3090 Founders Edition card that has the white glow on the text. So I think it's a very clean aesthetic build that you'd be going for if you decide to pick up this cooler. The other thing to note is that the CPU block is actually nickel plated. Now, back to the inline pump. The logic behind this with Be Quiet was, one, they didn't want to continue having a partnership with Asetek, which makes the actual inline pumps, and they hold a patent on that, or not inline, but the block pumps. So because they didn't want to do that route and pay the premium for that, they decided to go and do an inline pump, which is really cool to see. Now, this does present a little bit of a challenge depending on how you're going to be positioning this in the case that you have, because as you can see, it sticks out a little bit. Now, the way they designed this is so that it doesn't naturally interfere with anything, but I would still recommend that you guys make sure that this would be able to fit in your case by taking a look at the overall measurements that are posted on the website, so that way you have a good sense of if this will fit your case or not. Now, in terms of noise levels, the pump is virtually silent, and they've done that by using couplers on both sides that dampen the vibrations that come out of the actual pump. In fact, it's so near silent that even using a dB meter with this, I couldn't really pick up any sound directly from the pump, even with the fans turned off. So definitely really good quality pumping used inside this. The fan level noises, these are the actual silent wings that they're using on here, so it has the same level of noise that you'd expect to hear from a silent wings fan set. But nonetheless, it's actually a very quiet unit overall. If you have it in a pretty decent airflowing case, you're not going to hear it too loud depending on how or what fan speeds that you're running. If you run this at max, you're obviously going to hear that, but if you're on the 40 to 50% level, it's not going to be too noisy. But that pretty much covers what this thing is constructed of and how they went a different route and in terms of aesthetics as well. Now let's go ahead and take a look at its overall cooling performance. We were testing it, as I mentioned, on a Ryzen 5 3400G, which is 4 cores, 8 threads. I'm doing a stress test with Prime 95 for about an hour, as well as running Cinebench R20 a number of times just to see how much we can push this cooler. So overall, the results are actually pretty interesting. Comparing the $105 unit, which is the 280mm radiator, to the 360mm unit, it's not a whole lot of difference in terms of cooling performance. I think at max, I saw about a 2-degree difference between the two, running the same exact test with the same exact stress levels and everything being all else solid, essentially. So what does that really tell us, right? First, it tells us that both of these coolers are really good. Second, it tells us that you don't necessarily need to go for a 360mm radiator, depending on the setup you have. A 280mm radiator is going to do just as good, nearly, as a 360-degree one will do. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that if you're using, let's say, a Ryzen 9 or an Intel Core 10900XE or 9900K, or you're on like one of those 8-core, 10-core builds and plus, so if it's a 3950X and you're looking at 16 cores, you may naturally want to go with a 360mm radiator because you're dealing with a lot more heat output. But if you compare the 280mm radiator to this on a mid-level CPU such as a Ryzen 5 or a Core i5 or even a Core i7, I think they both will pretty much work and operate in the same manner in terms of cooling performance. So you're pretty much well off picking one which suits your build specifically and which fits in your case as well. If you don't have space for a 360mm, you obviously can't even get one like that. But it's interesting to see that the cooling performance out of the box for both of these coolers is relatively similar. So with that in mind, guys, it's pretty much up to you. I would personally pick the cheaper one only if I'm going to be using this on a mid-tier CPU, but if I'm going to be using this, let's say on a 3900X or a 3950X, or the new line of Ryzen processors that have higher core frequencies that are naturally going to be running a little bit hotter, you'd want to stick with something that's a little bit bigger. But again, depending on your situation, which one makes sense, I'll let you guys decide that. But overall, it's safe to say that if you're going to be running something that's hotter, more constricted, you probably want to take the 360mm versus the 280mm all-in-one cooler. Of all the different coolers that I've tested on this channel, this one is a very solid contender, especially when you consider price to performance ratio. And I actually love the fact that they decide to go with an RGB less design, even though I've got RGB galore in all of the computers that I've built back there. But I still like that this has a clean aesthetic look and it will match really well with the new 3080 and the 3090 Founder Edition cards, if that's something that you guys are looking to do in your build. But anyways, guys, if you're new to the channel, please hit that like button and that subscribe button so that you guys are up to date with when I'm putting out new content, and it actually helps my channel grow quite a bit. And as always, guys, I appreciate you guys sticking through to the end of this video. If you have any questions or comments in regards to where you can go ahead and pick this up, I will leave a link in the description below for you guys to check it out. And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me and I'll do my best to address them. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.